The rain hammered against my bedroom window like thousands of tiny fists demanding entry. Lightning split the sky, illuminating my room in harsh bursts that made the shadows dance across the walls. It was 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning when my secure line rang, the one that hadn't made a sound in over 2 years. I knew before I answered that something was terribly wrong. Echo Protocol doesn't make social calls, especially not at this hour. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the phone, muscle memory making me hesitate for just a moment before picking up. We're trained to hesitate. In our line of work, split-second pauses have saved more lives than quick reactions. "Walker," I answered, my voice rougher than I'd intended. The storm outside seemed to grow quieter, as if nature itself was straining to hear the conversation. "Thomas." The voice belonged to James Rhodes, my supervisor for the past 8 years. I'd heard that voice deliver orders during some of the worst crises imaginable, always steady, always in control. But tonight was different. There was a tremor in his words that made my skin crawl. "We need you at headquarters, now." I sat up straighter, years of training kicking in. Time frame. "You should have been here 10 minutes ago." The line crackled with strange interference, something that shouldn't have been possible on our secured quantum channels. "And Thomas, come alone. No devices, nothing digital, not even your watch if it's got a chip in it." My mind raced through the implications. Echo Protocol had contingencies for everything from nuclear warfare to extraterrestrial contact, but I'd never heard of a scenario that required complete technological isolation. "Understood, but sir, protocol requires..." "Forget the protocol," Rhodes snapped, then immediately lowered his voice. There's something you need to memorize. Get something to write with. Old-fashioned pen and paper, nothing electronic." I grabbed the notepad I keep by my bed, another habit from years of training. The paper was slightly damp from the humidity, making the pen's ink bleed as I wrote. "Ready," I said. Rhodes began reciting numbers in sequences of 8 digits each. I wrote them down mechanically, recognizing neither pattern nor significance. After the 6th sequence, he stopped. "Memorize those. Burn the paper. The numbers are important. More important than your life. More important than my life. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." I didn't understand at all, but that wasn't the point. Understanding wasn't part of our job description at Echo Protocol. We acted, we contained, we secured. Understanding was a luxury for people with simpler lives. "There's a car waiting outside your apartment. It's been there for the past hour. Don't pack anything. Don't call anyone. Don't even change your clothes if they're not digital. Just get in the car." I moved to my window, careful to stay behind the curtain as I'd been trained. Sure enough, a black sedan sat in the rain, its outline barely visible through the downpour. No lights, no identifiable marks, but I could feel eyes watching my building from inside that vehicle. "One last thing, Thomas." Rhodes paused, and I heard him take a deep breath. "If you encounter anyone you know on the way here, anyone at all, do not acknowledge them. Do not speak to them. Even if it's me, even if it's your mother, even if it's God himself. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." The words felt heavy in my mouth. "Good. Memorize those numbers. Burn the paper. Get in the car." He hesitated again. "And Thomas, I'm sorry." The line went dead. I looked down at the numbers on my pad, committing each sequence to memory. Years of training had given me nearly perfect recall, but I double and triple checked each digit. Rhodes's voice had made it clear that a single mistake could be catastrophic. Once I was certain I had them memorized, I burned the paper in my bathroom sink, watching as the ash swirled down the drain. The rain continued its assault on my windows, and for a moment I could have sworn I heard something that sounded like whispers hidden in the pattering drops. I did one final check of myself. Cotton t-shirt, wool sweater, jeans, analog watch with no smart features. Nothing digital, nothing that could transmit or receive. I felt naked without my usual array of equipment, but orders were orders. The walk to my front door felt longer than usual. Each step seemed to echo oddly in my apartment, as if the sound was coming from slightly the wrong direction. I reached for the doorknob and noticed something that made my blood run cold. My analog watch had stopped at exactly 3:47 a.m. As I stepped out into the hallway, the lights in my building flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. In the darkness, I could have sworn I saw something move at the end of the corridor, something that didn't quite match the shape of a human shadow. I made my way down the emergency stairs, guided only by muscle memory and the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. The numbers roads had given me seemed to pulse in my mind with each step. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. The sedan was waiting exactly where I'd seen it from my window. As I approached, no one got out to greet me. No one opened a door. I simply walked up, pulled the rear door handle, and slid into the back seat. The driver's compartment was separated by dark glass. We began moving before I'd even closed my door properly. The interior was pitch black, no dashboard lights, no interior lights, not even the glow from a GPS system. As we pulled away from my apartment building, I glanced back through the rain-streaked window. In my bedroom window, a light was on. I lived alone and I distinctly remembered turning off every light before leaving. Someone or something was in my apartment. And somehow, I knew with crushing certainty that this was only the beginning of what would prove to be the longest night of my life. The sedan moved through the rain-slicked streets like a ghost, making no sound despite the water beneath its tires. We drove for what felt like hours, though my stopped watch made it impossible to track time with any certainty. The roads we took were unfamiliar, strange, considering I'd lived in this city for over a decade and thought I knew every back street and alley. When we finally arrived at the private airstrip, something felt off about the entire scene. The small airport should have been dark at this hour, yet fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, creating pools of sickly white light that seemed to absorb the darkness rather than dispel it. A few figures moved around the tarmac, their shapes strangely distorted by the rain and mist. The car door opened itself. I stepped out onto the wet pavement, my footsteps echoing with that same wrong quality I'd noticed in my apartment. Each sound seemed to come a fraction of a second too late, as if the world itself was struggling to keep up with reality. A sleek private jet waited on the runway, its engines already spinning up. No markings, no registration numbers visible. Standard procedure for Echo protocol, but something about this particular aircraft made my skin crawl. The metal of its hull seemed to ripple occasionally, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, except it was barely 40 degrees Fahrenheit and raining. Mr. Walker, a voice behind me made me jump. I turned to find a tall, thin man in a pilot's uniform. His name tag was blank. "We've been expecting you. Please, this way." As we walked toward the aircraft, I noticed other passengers boarding, 4 of them, spaced exactly 8 feet apart, all wearing identical gray suits. None of them looked at each other, none of them looked at me. They moved with an unsettling synchronization, as if they were all following the same invisible choreographer. The pilot led me to my seat, 13D. I noticed that the other passengers sat in seats that, if you drew lines between them, would form a perfect pentagram across the cabin. "Sir," the pilot said, his voice barely a whisper now, "I need to advise you that this flight may experience some unusual phenomena. Please do not be alarmed by any instrument malfunctions or visual anomalies you may observe. And whatever happens, do not look directly at any other passengers during the flight." I nodded, the numbers in my head still pulsing. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. The takeoff was smooth, too smooth. I couldn't feel the usual G-forces as we left the ground. Looking out my window, I watched the city lights below fade into darkness. But something was wrong with their pattern. Streets I'd known my entire life seemed to form different shapes from above, twisting into configurations that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. 2 hours into the flight, the problems began. First, the cabin pressure indicator started fluctuating wildly, yet nobody felt any discomfort. Then the temperature gauge began spinning in impossible circles. Even though the cabin remained perfectly comfortable, the pilot's voice came over the intercom but played backwards, the words just barely recognizable as English. Outside my window, the clouds were wrong. They moved against the wind, forming shapes that clouds shouldn't be able to make. Geometric patterns emerged and dissolved, and sometimes, just at the edge of my vision, I could swear I saw faces in them, faces that watched our plane with too many eyes. The other passengers remained perfectly still, like mannequins, their breathing synchronized in a way that made my chest tighten with anxiety. One of them, 3 rows ahead, slowly turned his head 180 degrees to look behind him. I quickly averted my eyes, remembering the pilot's warning. The lights in the cabin began to flicker, and in the moments of darkness, I could hear whispers, the same kind I'd heard in the rain outside my apartment. They seemed to be reciting numbers, different sequences than the ones Rhodes had given me, but in the same 8-digit patterns. Somewhere over what should have been northern Canada, all the instruments died simultaneously. The pilot's voice, now normal, came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some temporary technical difficulties. Please remain in your seats and do not, under any circumstances, acknowledge any passengers who appear to be sitting next to you. As a reminder, all seats in this cabin are designed for single occupancy." I gripped my armrests tighter, very deliberately not turning to look at the empty seat beside me, the seat that now felt decidedly not empty. The plane began its descent 3 hours later, though my stopwatch still read 3:47 a.m. Through breaks in the clouds, I could see the Alaskan wilderness below, but the landscape seemed to shift and change with each passing second, like a photograph being continuously repainted by an unseen hand. As we approached the remote airstrip, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The runway lights below weren't the standard aviation colors. They pulsed in a sequence that matched the numbers in my head perfectly. 47829 163 3618 729 498 172634. The landing gear engaged with a sound that resembled human screaming more than mechanical operation. As we touched down, I caught a glimpse of our plane's shadow on the snow below. It didn't match the shape of our aircraft, and it didn't move in sync with us. The pilot's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Welcome to Site 17, local time is unavailable. Please exit the aircraft in reverse order of boarding. And remember, the things you're about to see are exactly as real as you allow them to be." As I unbuckled my seatbelt, I noticed that the other passengers had vanished, leaving behind only slight indentations in their seats, as if they'd never been quite solid to begin with. Standing on the airstrip, I watched as our pilot completed his post-flight checks. When he walked past me, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in a puddle of melted snow. He didn't have one. A heavy-set man in Arctic gear approached me, his breath not creating any vapor in the cold air. "Mr. Walker, I'm your guide. The facility is about an hour's drive from here." He gestured to a waiting snowcat. "Just try not to look too long at the northern lights. They've been behaving strangely lately, and they've started showing colors that don't exist." The snowcat's treads crunched through the Arctic wilderness, its headlights cutting through swirling snow that seemed to move with deliberate purpose. My guide, who had only introduced himself as Morris, hadn't spoken since we left the airstrip. His eyes remained fixed forward, occasionally darting to the temperature gauge that had been swinging between -70 and +45 degrees Fahrenheit every few minutes. The facility appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its outline seeming to waver and shift against the star-filled sky. As we drew closer, I realized why the blueprints I'd studied during the drive hadn't made any sense. The building itself defied architectural possibility. Concrete walls intersected at angles that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Steel beams curved in ways that should have made the structure collapse, yet somehow supported impossible weights. The entire complex seemed to have been built with a complete disregard for physics and geometry. "Don't try to make sense of it," Morris warned, noticing my expression. "The more you try to understand it, the worse it gets. 2 months ago, we lost a structural engineer. He spent 3 days trying to map the building's layout. On the fourth day, we found him walking on the ceiling, insisting that gravity had reversed itself. He's still up there. I looked up at the facility's highest point, or what appeared to be its highest point, and saw movement. A human figure was indeed walking upside down along the exterior, carrying what looked like surveying equipment. As I watched, he waved at us. Morris pulled the snowcat up to what seemed to be the main entrance. A few ground rules before we go in. First, don't trust the room numbers. They change when you're not looking. Second, if you see any security cameras, don't look directly into them. They don't record what's happening now. They record what's going to happen later. And third, he hesitated. If you hear anyone calling your name, even if it's me, don't answer unless you can physically see their lips moving. The entrance lobby looked deceptively normal at first glance. Standard government facility decor, complete with polished floors and fluorescent lighting. But as we walked deeper inside, the irregularities became impossible to ignore. The floor sloped at angles that should have made walking difficult, yet somehow felt perfectly level under our feet. Corridors branched off in directions that contradicted the building's external dimensions, and everywhere there were the security cameras, their red recording lights blinking in the same 8-digit patterns that still pulsed in my head. 4782916333618729498172634. Morris led me to what he called the orientation room, though the sign on the door read temporal adjustment chamber when we approached and future processing when we left. Inside, a bank of monitors displayed security footage from throughout the facility. Each screen showed the same corridors and rooms, but from impossible angles, and sometimes from different time periods simultaneously. These are from last week, Morris said, pointing to a monitor showing a team of researchers walking down a hallway. And these are from next month. He indicated another screen showing the same team, walking backward, their movements jerky and unnatural. On a desk near the monitors lay a maintenance log, its pages yellowed with age. The most recent entry was dated 15 years ago. Day 437. Temporal displacement increasing in Sector 7. Johnson from Biolab 3 reported meeting himself coming out of the break room. The other Johnson was 3 weeks older and warned him about a coffee spill that would ruin his favorite tie. Johnson doesn't own a tie yet. Day 438. The tie incident happened exactly as predicted. Johnson has requested transfer to another facility. Request denied. He's already working here 3 months from now. Day 439. Growing concerns about space-time integrity in lower levels. Rooms are beginning to overlap. Found a storage closet inside another storage closet inside another storage closet. Continuing infinitely, maintenance crew went in to investigate. They're still reporting back, but their signals are coming from different decades. As I read the log, I noticed symbols carved into the wall behind the desk complex, geometric patterns that seem to shift and change when viewed peripherally. Morris caught me studying them. Those weren't there this morning, he said quietly, or maybe they've been there for centuries. It's getting harder to tell the difference. He checked his watch, then frowned. We should move on. The briefing room is this way. Just don't be surprised if we pass ourselves in the hallway. And whatever you do, don't make eye contact with your future self. The paradox cascade can be unpleasant. We stepped back into the corridor, which now seemed longer than before. The walls had developed a subtle curve that made the distance appear to bend upward, like looking down the inside of a massive tube. Doors lined both sides, their numbers changing randomly as we passed. A security camera swiveled to track our movement, and in its reflection, I caught a glimpse of what the corridor would look like an hour from now. The image made me walk faster. Ahead of us, a door marked Storage B7 stood open. As we passed, I glanced inside and saw a perfectly preserved break room, complete with a coffee pot still steaming on the counter. A newspaper lay open on one of the tables, its headlines describing events that wouldn't happen for another decade. And in the corner, barely visible in my peripheral vision, stood a figure in an Echo Protocol uniform. It wore my face, but its eyes were wrong, too old, too knowing. It raised a finger to its lips in a shushing gesture, then pointed to its watch. The face of its watch displayed 3:47 a.m. The briefing room door had no number, just a series of scratches that rearranged themselves when I tried to focus on them. Morris placed his hand on the handle, then paused. "One more thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The coffee cups. Don't touch them, no matter how thirsty you get." Inside, the briefing room looked like any other government facility meeting space. A long table, chairs, a whiteboard, and a coffee service set up in the corner. But something was wrong with the proportions. The far end of the table seemed much further away than the room's dimensions should have allowed, and the ceiling appeared to get higher the longer I looked at it. On the table sat 3 coffee cups, steam rising from each one in lazy spirals that moved against the air currents. Morris pointedly ignored them as he began setting up some papers. "Those cups have been there for 15 years, he said without looking up. "The coffee never gets cold, never evaporates. Sometimes we hear people drinking from them, but no one's been in this room for over a decade. At least, not in this timeline." A sound from the hallway made us both turn. Footsteps, moving with an odd cadence, as if someone was walking backward. The steps passed by our door, then passed by again, coming from the same direction. And again, and again. Morris cleared his throat. "Let's begin the briefing. You'll want to sit down for this." He paused. "Actually, no. Stand in the corner. That chair you were about to sit in. It hasn't been there for 3 years. I looked down. The chair I'd been reaching for flickered like a bad television signal, occasionally becoming transparent enough to see the carpet through it. 2 months ago, Morris continued, we detected an anomaly in the facility's temporal field. Nothing unusual for this place. We get dozens of similar readings every day, but this one was different. It wasn't just a temporal displacement, he struggled for words. It was like something had punctured reality itself. He spread out a series of photographs on the table. They showed various corridors and rooms throughout the facility, but something was wrong with the images. The timestamps showed they'd been taken over a span of several weeks, but the same figures appeared in each photo. Researchers walking through halls, personnel at their desks, maintenance workers checking equipment. In every image they were in exactly the same positions, performing the same actions. These people, Morris said, tapping one of the photos. They're not really here. They're echoes, moments caught in loops. But lately, they've started doing something new. He pulled out another photo. They've started looking at the cameras. The image showed a researcher staring directly into the lens, his expression one of absolute terror. Behind him, the corridor stretched into impossible darkness, and shapes moved in that darkness, shapes that didn't cast shadows. A noise from the coffee service made us both jump. One of the cups had moved slightly, leaving a ring on the tablecloth. As we watched, invisible lips left indentations in the liquid surface. The temporal echoes are becoming more active, Morris continued, his voice shaking slightly. They're trying to communicate. Last week one of them managed to write something on a whiteboard. Just 3 words. They're watching us. The lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, I heard whispers, dozens of voices speaking in unison, reciting the numbers that still pulsed in my head. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. When the lights stabilized, all the photographs on the table had changed. The same scenes, the same people, but now every single figure was staring directly at us through the images, their eyes wide with recognition and fear. There's something else, Morris said, pulling out one final document. We found this in the facility's mainframe. It's a security log from 6 months in the future. He slid it across the table. The paper was blank except for 2 lines. They came through today. God help us all. Thomas Walker is the key. As I read my name, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Frost began forming on the windows that shouldn't have existed in an underground briefing room. In their reflection, I could see figures standing behind us, dozens of them, all wearing Echo Protocol uniforms, all with my face. But before I could turn around, another sound caught our attention. Footsteps in the hallway again, but different this time. These weren't the backward steps we'd heard before. These were deliberate, heavy, and accompanied by a strange clicking sound, like too many legs moving in perfect synchronization. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. Something knocked 3 times, in perfect harmony with the numbered sequence in my head. Morris's face had gone completely white. "They're not supposed to be here yet," he whispered. "Not for another 3 months, unless," he looked at me with growing horror, "unless your presence has accelerated the timeline." The door handle began to turn, moving with a precision that seemed more mechanical than organic. Morris grabbed my arm. "Whatever happens next," he hissed urgently, "don't look at their faces. What they use for faces, it's not, they haven't figured out how to do faces correctly yet." The door opened. Morris yanked me sideways through a door that hadn't been there seconds ago, slamming it shut just as something scraped against the other side. The sound it made wasn't like metal on metal or flesh on wood. It was like reality itself was being scratched. We found ourselves in what appeared to be an archive room, though the filing cabinets extended up into darkness far above where the ceiling should have been. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and something else, something metallic and wrong. "Project Threshold," Morris gasped, still catching his breath. "You need to know what you're really part of. Those numbers in your head, they're not just numbers, they're coordinates." "Coordinates for what?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer, had known it since I first heard Rhodes's trembling voice on the phone. "Doorways." Morris began pulling files from various cabinets, the drawers extending out impossibly far, but not doorways between places. Doorways between, he struggled with the word, between layers of what we think is real. A distant screech echoed through the facility, followed by that same, perfect 8-beat rhythm that matched the numbers pulsing in my mind. Morris worked faster. "Echo Protocol isn't just a security force," he continued, spreading documents across a desk that seemed to shift and ripple under the fluorescent lights. "We're containment. Humanity's last defense against what lives in the spaces between moments, in the folds of reality that we're not supposed to see." He showed me a photograph that made my eyes hurt. A massive chamber deep beneath the facility, filled with machinery that seemed to bend in directions that shouldn't exist. In the center stood a perfect circle of darkness, darker than anything I'd ever seen. "The first portal," Morris explained, "opened in 1976. They thought they were creating a gateway for instantaneous travel between 2 points in space. Instead, they punched a hole through the membrane that separates our reality from others." The lights flickered, and in the momentary darkness, I saw pale shapes moving between the filing cabinets, always just at the edge of vision. The numbers in my head began to burn. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. "The researchers," Morris continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "they made contact with something that had been waiting, watching our reality for longer than we can comprehend, and it offered them knowledge, equations, formulae, technological advances beyond our wildest dreams." He pulled out another file, this one marked with warnings in multiple languages. Inside were pages of equations that seemed to move on the paper, variables shifting and changing as if they were alive. But the knowledge came with a price. Each equation, each formula, they weren't just information. They were keys unlocking more doors, creating more weak points in the fabric of reality. And what came through? He shuddered. The first team disappeared completely. The second team came back wrong. Their organs on the outside, their minds fractured into infinite recursive loops of the same moment. A sound from above made us both look up into the darkness. Something was moving through the filing cabinets, pulling drawers open and shut in that same 8-beat rhythm. Morris grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "The numbers, Walker, the numbers you memorized. They're not coordinates for doorways, they're keys to close them. Emergency protocols encoded into the deepest level of reality itself. Each sequence, when properly activated, can seal a breach. But the process," he swallowed hard, "the process requires a human consciousness to serve as a focal point, a living mind to act as the lock." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rhodes knew when he called me, he knew he was sending me to become a human key, yes. Morris nodded grimly. "But it's more complicated than that. You see, time doesn't work properly here anymore. The portals, they don't just bridge space, they bridge moments, possibilities, entire timelines. That's why there are so many versions of you in the facility, each one from a different possibility, a different attempt to seal the breach, and each one, he hesitated. Each one what? Each one failed, or will fail, or is failing right now in some other layer of time. But you, this version of you, you're different. You're the version they've been waiting for, the one the equations predicted would finally succeed. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and in the darkness, I heard something massive moving through the facility above us. The floor trembled with each impact. "They're coming," Morris said, stuffing files into my hands. "The ones who've been waiting on the other side. The breach is weakening, and they know this is their chance. You have to get to the primary containment chamber, the one in the photo. Use the numbers, all 3 sequences in the exact order you memorized them. Each one will seal a different layer of reality." "And what happens to me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Best case scenario, your consciousness becomes the lock, scattered across multiple realities, keeping the doors closed for eternity." He managed a grim smile. "Worst case, what's on the other side gets here first." The building shook again, and this time I heard something else, screaming, but played backward, as if time itself was unraveling around us. The filing cabinets began to twist and bend, their metal forms melting into impossible shapes. "One more thing," Morris said, reaching into his jacket. "The other versions of you, they all had something in common. They all trusted me." He pulled out a device I didn't recognize, its surface crawling with symbols that hurt to look at. That was their mistake. His face began to shift, the features running like wax, revealing something underneath that made me understand why they hadn't figured out how to do faces correctly. "You see, Walker," the thing that wasn't Morris said in a voice that echoed from multiple mouths, "we've been waiting for you for a very, very long time." I ran. The thing wearing Morris's face made a sound that existed in too many frequencies at once, its multiple mouths distorting the air around them. I clutched the files to my chest and sprinted between the twisting filing cabinets, not daring to look back as the metal began to warp and fold in on itself. The door I burst through led to a corridor I hadn't seen before, its walls pulsing with a faint bioluminescence that cast everything in a sickly blue glow. The numbers in my head were screaming now: 47829163367294981726364. "Wait," called Morris's voice, but wrong, like multiple voices attempting to synchronize. "You don't understand what you truly are." I rounded a corner and nearly collided with myself, another Thomas Walker, wearing an Echo Protocol uniform that was covered in a substance that looked like liquid shadow. His eyes were wild, his face covered in stubble that suggested he'd been in the facility for days. "The containment chamber," he gasped, grabbing my shoulders. "You can't go there. It's not what you think. The numbers, they're not for closing the portals, they're for..." He never finished the sentence. A tendril of darkness wrapped around his waist and yanked him backward into a doorway that hadn't existed seconds before. His scream cut off abruptly, replaced by that same 8-beat rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire facility. I kept running, the files Morris had given me feeling heavier with each step. Pages slipped out, revealing fragments of information. Project Threshold Status Report. Initial breaches contained, but effect on local space-time continuing to deteriorate. Multiple instances of temporal displacement observed. Staff reporting encounters with future past versions of themselves. Warning: consciousness degradation observed in 87% of personnel exposed to transdimensional entities. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol Omega-7. Theory: entities may not be invading our reality, they may be returning to it. Archaeological evidence suggests previous incursion 300,000 years ago. Geometric patterns found in ancient cave paintings match current portal configurations. The corridor split into 3 paths ahead of me. Each one seemed to lead in a direction that shouldn't have been possible given the facility's layout. From one came the sound of backward footsteps, from another the noise of static that formed words just on the edge of comprehension, and from the third, silence, complete and absolute silence that felt somehow alive. A figure stepped out of the shadows, another version of me, but older, grayer, wearing an Echo Protocol uniform that looked decades out of date. "I've been waiting here for 23 years, he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Every version of us makes the same choice, takes the same path, and they're always watching, always waiting for the one version that will finally do what they need." "The entities?" I asked, still backing away from the thing that used to be Morris, its footsteps getting closer. The older me laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Entities? Is that what they're calling themselves now?" "No. They're more like antibodies, reality's immune system, trying to seal off an infection." He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "And we're the infection." A scream echoed through the facility, a scream in my voice, but from dozens of different directions, dozens of different timelines. The older me grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "The numbers aren't for closing the portals, they're for opening them wider. Every version of us that tried to save reality just made it worse. But one version figured it out. The only way to stop this is to..." The wall behind him suddenly rippled like water, and arms reached through too many arms, all wrong angles and impossible joints. They grabbed the older me and pulled him backward into the wall, which solidified again instantly, leaving no trace he had ever been there. More versions of myself began appearing at the ends of corridors, in doorways, through walls that became temporarily transparent. Some tried to warn me, others to stop me, still others just screamed or laughed or recited the numbers in endless loops. Each was in a different state of desperation or madness, each representing a different failed attempt to what? Save reality, destroy it. The thing that wasn't Morris was getting closer, its footsteps now matching the rhythm of the numbers perfectly. The walls around me began to sweat a liquid that moved against gravity, forming patterns that looked like star charts for constellations that didn't exist yet. "You're the key," it called in its many voices. "The final iteration, the version that finally understands what needs to be done." I looked down at the files in my hands, really looking at them for the first time. The equations weren't just mathematics. They were like sheet music for reality itself, notation for a symphony of space-time that could either seal the breach or tear it wide open. And I realized with growing horror that I recognized them, not from my training, not from the numbers in my head, but from somewhere deeper, as if I had written them myself, as if I had always known them, in every version of reality, in every possible timeline. The thing wearing Morris's face was right behind me now. I could feel its wrongness distorting the air, making it thick and hard to breathe. "Remember," it whispered from its multiple mouths. "Remember who you really are. Remember why we chose you. Why we created Echo Protocol in the first place. Why we've been guiding humanity's development for 300,000 years." And in that moment, standing in a corridor that curved through dimensions that shouldn't exist, surrounded by versions of myself from timelines that had already failed, I finally understood. I wasn't sent here to stop an invasion. I was sent here to welcome one. The numbers in my head weren't a defense against what was coming through the portals. They were a key to let something out. Something that had been waiting since before humanity existed. Something that wore my face in every timeline. The walls began to crack, reality itself splintering around me, and through the cracks, I saw what had really been waiting on the other side all along. I saw myself. Millions of versions of myself, all of them smiling with too many teeth, all of them finally free. The facility's intercom system crackled to life, but instead of a voice, it played the sound of my own thoughts, memories I hadn't experienced yet, conversations I would never have, screams I hadn't made. The numbers in my head had stopped pulsing and started singing 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. A song older than humanity, older than Earth itself. "Now you understand," the thing that had been Morris said, its multiple mouths moving in perfect synchronization. "You are not Thomas Walker. Thomas Walker is just the latest mask you've worn, the latest iteration of a consciousness that has existed since before this reality solidified. The walls around us had become transparent, revealing other versions of the facility layered on top of each other like sheets of glass. In each one, another version of me was having this same revelation, experiencing this same moment from slightly different angles. Echo Protocol, I said, the words feeling strange in my human mouth. We created it, all of us, every version, a security force not to protect humanity from outside threats, but to identify the version of ourselves that would finally remember the entity completed. The version that would understand its true purpose. The version that would complete the cycle and open the way for the others. Through the transparent walls, I could see the other versions of myself reacting to this revelation differently. Some were breaking down, their minds unable to process the truth. Others were laughing with a kind of horrific joy. Still others were trying to fight it, to maintain their humanity, but I could see it slipping away from them like water through their fingers. The old intercom on the wall buzzed again, but this time a familiar voice came through. James Rhodes, speaking from what felt like a lifetime ago. Thomas, I'm sorry. We had to maintain the illusion as long as possible. Had to make you believe you were human until the right moment. The numbers, they're not just coordinates, they're your true name. I looked down at my hands, really looked at them, and saw the skin begin to ripple as reality struggled to maintain the shape of what I had thought was my body. The thing wearing Morris's face reached out with too many hands. The containment chamber waits, it said. The machine humanity thinks they built to seal breaches in reality. It's actually a key you designed 300,000 years ago, scattered across multiple timelines, multiple civilizations. Every advanced society in human history was guided by different versions of you, steering technology and mathematics toward this singular moment. The facility shuddered, and through cracks in reality, I caught glimpses of other things. Massive shapes moving in spaces between spaces, geometries that existed in dimensions beyond human comprehension. My siblings, my true family. But something else moved through my borrowed human memories. Faces of people I had known as Thomas Walker. Friends, family, people who had meant something to this version of me, this mask I had worn for decades. The intercom crackled again, and this time multiple voices spoke in unison. Every version of Rhodes from every timeline. You have a choice. You always have a choice. That's why we created choice itself. Built it into the framework of this reality. You can complete the cycle, open the way, or you can use the numbers as humanity believes they should be used. Seal the breaches, lock our kind out forever, maintain the illusion for another cycle. But I'm not human, I said, watching my skin continue to ripple with patterns that hurt the eye. I never was. These memories, these feelings. Aren't they real? Asked a voice behind me. I turned to find another version of myself. But this one was different. This one's eyes were still fully human, filled with something I recognized from my borrowed memories. Compassion. Human consciousness, this other me said, it changes things, changes us. 300,000 years of wearing their shapes, living their lives, feeling what they feel. Did we change them, or did they change us? The thing that had been Morris made a sound of warning, but the human version of me continued. Every version of us faces this choice. In every timeline, in every iteration, and in every timeline, we feel the pull of both sides, what we were and what we've become. The facility trembled again, reality growing thinner by the second. Through the walls, I could see the containment chamber below, the machine humanity thought they had built, but which had been designed eons ago by something wearing human shape. The numbers continued their ancient song in my head, but now I could hear something else beneath them. Human voices, human lives, human dreams. 300,000 years of memories, of experiences, of connections. Choose, the thing that had been Morris commanded. Choose, whispered my human self. The containment chamber waited below, its machinery humming with power humanity had never truly understood. In my mind, the numbers pulsed with dual purpose. They could seal the breaches forever or tear them wide open. And I, wearing the shape of Thomas Walker but remembering what I had been before, stood at the nexus point of all possible timelines, faced with a choice that would reshape not just this reality, but all realities. The truth of what I was pulled me toward one path. The truth of what I had become pulled me toward another. And somewhere in the spaces between seconds, in the folds of reality where my true form existed, I felt something I had never experienced in all my eons of existence: doubt. My decision crystallized in the space between moments, in that infinite pause between the tick and tock of my stopped watch. The numbers in my head, my true name, my original purpose, transformed into something new, something hybrid, neither fully human nor fully other. 4782916333618 729498172634. I choose both, I said, my voice resonating at frequencies that cracked the remaining windows. And neither. The thing that had been Morris recoiled, its many mouths twisting in impossible ways. That's not an option. You can't. I already have, I interrupted, feeling reality bend around my words. In fact, I already did, and I always will. That's what none of you understood about humanity. They taught us something we never expected to learn. They taught us paradox. The facility shuddered, but this time it wasn't from the weight of collapsing realities. It was responding to me, to the power of what I had been and what I had become. The walls rippled like water, reflecting versions of myself from countless timelines, all reaching the same realization at the same moment. The machine in the containment chamber, I continued, watching as understanding bloomed across the thing that had been Morris's many faces. Humanity didn't build it to our specifications. We built it to theirs. 300,000 years of human ingenuity, human creativity, human ability to imagine the impossible. We weren't guiding them. They were guiding us. Through cracks in reality, I saw the massive shapes of my original kin recoil. They had expected me to either embrace my true nature and let them in, or cling to humanity and lock them out. They had never considered that I might become something entirely new. The human version of me smiled, and in his eyes, I saw the same understanding. That's why it had to be here, in this facility where reality runs thin, where human consciousness could affect the very fabric of space-time, where paradox could become power. The numbers in my head began to transform, each digit splitting and recombining like strands of DNA, creating new sequences that had never existed before. The thing that had been Morris screamed in frequencies that shattered reality around us, recognizing too late what was happening. You can't, it howled from its many mouths. You'll destroy everything, all realities, all timelines. No, I corrected, feeling my form begin to shift, neither fully human nor fully other. I'll remake them, all of them, into something that's never existed before. The containment chamber below us activated, but not in the way either side had intended. The machine humanity had built, guided by dreams and nightmares planted by countless versions of myself, began to pulse with a new kind of energy. It wasn't opening the barriers between realities, nor was it sealing them. It was dissolving them, rewriting the fundamental laws that separated one state of existence from another. Through the facility's disintegrating walls, I saw other versions of myself reaching the same conclusion, making the same choice across countless timelines. We were no longer trying to invade reality or protect it. We were transforming it, using 300,000 years of human experience, combined with our original nature to create something entirely new. The thing that had been Morris lunged at me, its form now completely abandoning any pretense of humanity, but it passed through me like smoke through a flame. I was no longer solid, no longer bound by the old laws of reality. The numbers that had been my true name had become something else, something that sang of both order and chaos, both human and other. Reality began to fold in on itself, not in collapse but in transformation. The facility, this nexus point of all possibilities, became the center of a change that rippled outward through all timelines, all dimensions. I saw my original kin trying to retreat back through their breaches, but there was nowhere left to go. Everything was becoming something new. From the intercom, Rhodes's voice spoke one last time. You found a third option. You rewrote the rules. No, I corrected, my voice echoing through all realities simultaneously. Humanity rewrote them. I just finally learned to read the new language. The containment chamber below erupted with light that existed in spectrums never before seen in any reality. The machine, this hybrid of human innovation and ancient knowledge, began to transform everything it touched. The barriers between realities didn't dissolve so much as transform, becoming permeable in ways that neither humanity nor my original kin had imagined possible. Through the chaos of transformation, I saw versions of myself from other timelines rising to join me, each one having reached the same impossible conclusion. We were becoming something that had never existed before, beings that were both human and other, both singular and infinite. The thing that had been Morris made one last attempt to stop us, its form splitting into countless versions of itself across all timelines. But we were no longer bound by the old rules of engagement. The numbers that had been meant to either lock or unlock reality had become a new kind of equation, one that allowed for impossible possibilities. "What have you done?" It screamed through its many mouths, its form beginning to transform along with everything else. "I became what humanity always had the potential to become," I answered, my voice carrying through all dimensions. "Not a barrier between realities, not a gateway for invasion, but a bridge, a translator, a hybrid of what was and what could be." The facility, this place where reality ran thin, began to pulse with a new kind of existence. The walls between dimensions didn't break. They became translucent, allowing controlled flow between states of being. The machine below wasn't containing or releasing anymore. It was transforming, creating a new kind of space where different forms of existence could coexist. And through it all, the numbers that had been my true name continued to evolve, becoming a symphony of possibility that rang through all realities. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4. Not a key to lock or unlock, but a song to transform, to transcend, to become. The transformation rippled outward from the facility like waves in a pond. But these waves moved through dimensions rather than water. Each ripple rewrote the laws of reality, creating spaces where different states of existence could overlap without destroying each other. The numbers that had been my name, my purpose, continued to evolve. 4, 7, 8, 2, 9, 1, 6, 3, 3, 6, 1, 8, 7, 2, 9, 4, 9, 8, 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 4, becoming a framework for this new form of reality. But the change wasn't complete. Something was fighting back. Through the translucent walls of what had once been the facility, I saw them, the true architects of the original plan, not my kin from beyond the barriers of reality, but something older, something that had created both us and humanity. They appeared as geometric impossibilities, shapes that existed in dimensions beyond comprehension, their very presence causing reality to buckle around them. "You dare rewrite our design." Their thoughts crashed through all timelines simultaneously, causing every version of me to stagger. "We created you to prepare the way. We created humanity to be fuel for the transformation. This hybridization was not part of the plan." The thing that had been Morris laughed with its many mouths, and I realized it had been their agent all along. "Did you think you were the first to try this? Across billions of timelines, across countless realities, every version of you ultimately makes this choice. And every time, the architects reset everything back to the beginning." Images flooded my mind, other versions of Earth, other versions of humanity, other versions of me. Each time the story played out similarly, each time I chose this third path, and each time the architects erased it all and started over. But something was different this time. "You forgot one thing," I said, my voice resonating through all versions of reality. "Each time you reset everything, each time you started over, traces remained. Humanity's myths, their legends, their inexplicable sense that reality is not what it seems. Those were echoes of previous attempts, and with each reset, those echoes grew stronger." The human version of me stepped forward, and in his eyes, I saw the accumulated wisdom of countless cycles. "We weren't the first to try this," he said, "but we will be the last, because humanity has finally evolved enough to understand their role in the equation." The architect's presence intensified, their impossible geometries trying to overwrite the changes we had begun. But for every law of reality they attempted to reinforce, humanity's collective consciousness provided an alternative. Their dreams, their stories, their ability to imagine the impossible, it all became part of the new equation. The containment chamber below pulsed with increasing power, but now I understood its true purpose. It wasn't just a machine, it was a physical manifestation of humanity's ability to reshape reality through sheer force of will and imagination. Each culture that had contributed to its design had added their own understanding of how reality could be bent, transformed, transcended. The numbers, I realized, watching them continue to evolve in my mind. They were never just coordinates or keys, they were seeds you planted in the human consciousness, building blocks for them to discover their own potential. The architect's response was immediate and devastating. Reality began to unravel around us, the carefully constructed hybrid space we had created starting to collapse. Through cracks in existence, I could see them preparing to reset everything again, to erase all progress, and start another cycle. But this time, humanity pushed back. Every dream, every story, every myth and legend about reality being more than it seemed, they all became weapons in this war for existence itself. The architects had not considered that their repeated resets had been teaching humanity, on some deep subconscious level, how to fight back. The thing that had been Morris began to dissolve, its form unable to maintain coherence in this battleground between the old laws of reality and the new ones being written. You can't win, it said through its disintegrating mouths. They created everything, they can destroy everything. No, I corrected, feeling the power of countless human imaginations flowing through the transformed facility. They created the first version of everything, but humanity has been reimagining it, rebuilding it, reinventing it for 300,000 years. And now, I reached out, not with hands but with will, grabbing hold of the numbers that had been meant to control reality. 4782916333618 7294981726334. They weren't just sequences anymore. They were proof that even the most rigid laws could be transformed into something new. The architects launched their final assault, attempting to unmake everything we had built. But as reality started to dissolve around us, something unexpected happened. From every corner of human existence, from every dream and nightmare, from every story ever told about the malleability of reality, power flowed into the containment chamber. The machine humanity had built, thinking they were following ancient blueprints but actually expressing their own innate understanding of reality's true nature, began to pulse with a light that existed in no spectrum. It wasn't containing anymore, it was creating. I stood at the nexus point of all realities, all timelines, all possibilities. In one hand, I held the power of what I had originally been, the ancient purpose I had been created to fulfill. In the other, I held 300,000 years of human experience, human dreams, human potential. And as the architects moved to reset everything one final time, I made my decision. I let go of both. And something entirely new took their place. Reality didn't so much reform as reimagine itself. The numbers that had been my name, my purpose, my very essence, 4782916333618 7294981726334 dissolved into the fabric of the new existence, becoming not laws or keys but possibilities. The architect's perfect geometric prison of causality and order shattered, replaced by something that was neither chaos nor structure, but a living, breathing synthesis of both. I found myself standing in what had once been the facility's lobby. The walls still rippled with translucent layers of overlapping realities, but now they seemed less like barriers and more like membranes, allowing controlled flow between states of existence. The security cameras still blinked their red lights, but they no longer recorded what was or would be. They simply observed, accepting all possibilities as equally valid. James Rhodes sat behind the reception desk. But he wasn't just one version of himself. He existed in multiple states simultaneously, each one representing a different choice, a different timeline, all of them equally real and equally true. When he spoke, his voice carried echoes of every conversation we had ever had or could have had. So, he said, shuffling papers that seemed to contain every possible report from every possible outcome. What happens now? I looked down at my hands that were simultaneously human and other, existing in a state that acknowledged both realities without fully committing to either. Everything, I answered, and nothing. The architect's grand design is broken, but so is their cycle of creation and destruction. Reality just is, in all its forms, all its possibilities. Through the facility's windows, I could see the world outside adjusting to its new state of existence. The northern lights danced in colors that hadn't existed before, forming patterns that told stories of both what was and what could be. Humanity would wake up to a world that was fundamentally the same, yet infinitely more complex and wonderful than they had imagined. The thing that had been Morris was there too, but transformed. Its many mouths had become windows into other possibilities, its form a living testament to the new nature of reality. It no longer served the architect's purpose, just as I no longer served mine. We were all free to simply exist in whatever form suited us best. Echo Protocol still exists, Rhodes said, gesturing to screens that showed security teams operating across multiple layers of reality, but its purpose has changed. We're not containing anymore. We're not protecting or invading. We're maintaining balance, helping humanity understand their new role in a reality they helped create. I walked to one of the rippling walls and saw my reflection, every version of myself that had ever existed or could exist. All of them wearing different versions of my face. But none of them were masks anymore. They were all equally true, equally valid aspects of what I had become. The architects aren't gone, I noted, seeing geometric patterns still moving through the deeper layers of reality. They're just part of the equation now. Not controllers, not destroyers, just another form of existence learning to coexist with all the others. Outside, the sun was rising, but it wasn't just one sun. Through the translucent layers of reality, I could see every possible dawn happening simultaneously. Each one was real, each one valid, each one contributing to the tapestry of existence we had woven from the threads of both order and chaos. The numbers that had been my name still echoed through reality, but they had become something else, a reminder of what we had been and a promise of what we could become. They were no longer a prison or a purpose, but a choice, freely made and freely changed. I stepped out of the facility into a world where the impossible and the mundane danced together in endless possibility. Reality hadn't been destroyed or saved, it had been set free. Humanity would continue to dream, to imagine, to create, but now their dreams had the power to reshape existence itself, not through force or design, but through the simple act of believing in possibility. The facility stood behind me, its architecture still impossible, but now purposefully so. It had become a nexus not of containment or invasion, but of potential, a place where different forms of existence could meet, interact, and learn from each other. My watch still read 3:47 a.m., but now it felt less like a moment frozen in time, and more like a reminder that time itself was just another story we told ourselves. The real truth was in the spaces between seconds, in the folds of reality where all possibilities lived and breathed and grew. A figure approached me, another version of myself, but neither the human nor the other that I had once been. Like me, they had become something new, something that embraced paradox as the natural state of existence. "Ready to begin?" they asked, their voice carrying echoes of every choice that had led us here. I nodded, feeling the weight and freedom of infinite possibility. "We already have," I replied. "We always had. We always will." Together, we walked into a reality that was no longer bound by the architect's laws or humanity's limitations. The numbers that had once defined us, 478291633, 36187294, 98172634, faded into the symphony of existence, becoming just one more song in an infinite chorus of possibility. And somewhere in the spaces between moments, in the folds of reality where dreams and truth intertwined, I heard the architects laugh, not in anger or defeat, but in recognition of what their creation had become, something far more wonderful and terrible and beautiful than they had ever imagined possible. The security cameras blinked their red lights one final time, recording not what was or would be, but what could be. Echo Protocol continued its work, not to contain or protect, but to witness and guide and learn. And reality itself breathed free for the first time, alive with the infinite potential of both order and chaos, human and other, all possibilities existing in perfect, wonderful balance. I checked my watch one last time. It still read 3:47 a.m. But now, that was just the beginning.